Well, hello, everyone. Really good to see you. I'm Anne-Marie Green alongside Vladimir Duthier. Vlad, we made it to Friday, but it has been a topsy-turvy week, and we are still dealing with the tremendous fallout from this week, the attack on our nation's capital. There are increasing calls for cabinet members to take a look at the 25th Amendment, but the cabinet, the president's cabinet, is getting smaller and smaller.
That's right. It has been a very difficult week, as you say, Anne-Marie, and you know, we now are learning, of course, that a Capitol Hill police officer died during that insurrection, what George W. Bush called an insurrection on the Capitol, and also that veteran, that Air Force veteran who died during that insurrection. And what rips your heart out, what rips my heart out, is I keep thinking about the fact that it didn't have to happen. A lot of these individuals believed information that was false, information that was not true, and they took it to heart. And this is the result. And the folks who were responsible for spreading those conspiracy theories, those false allegations, those lies, essentially, should really think twice and think hard about those lives that are lost and, of course, the people that have been injured. And so that's what I keep thinking about, that it just didn't have to happen. These people would still be here today celebrating 2021 the way we all are after we had such a terrible year in 2020 if they hadn't been fed these lies and this misinformation. And that's what really just destroys you. And as you say, Anne-Marie, the president's political future is now in peril more than ever, even though there's just a couple of weeks left in his term, as House lawmakers are now considering moving forward with a second impeachment. And there are others that are urging his now dwindling cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is holding a conference call at noon with her fellow Democrats. They're set to address potential next steps for impeaching the president a second time. Now, they, along with a growing number of their Republican colleagues, are accusing the president of inciting the violence that culminated in Wednesday's assault on the Capitol. And we've also learned, as I said earlier at the top, that one Capitol police officer has died following clashes with the pro-Trump mob. Nancy Cordes is there following the latest.
This is urgent. This is emergency of the highest magnitude.
Calling President Trump dangerous, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi declared he should be removed following this week's insurrection at the Capitol. Democrats plan to talk today about a backup plan.
If the 25th Amendment isn't invoked, the next best thing is impeachment ASAP.
And it wasn't just Democrats. Illinois Republican Adam Kinzinger.
It's time to invoke the 25th Amendment and to end this nightmare. All indications are that the president has become unmoored, not just from his duty, nor even his oath, but from reality itself.
Other Republicans, like Senator Marco Rubio, called out their own GOP colleagues, saying they misled supporters by suggesting that the election results could be overturned.
Criminals are responsible for their own conduct.
Senator Ted Cruz rejected that accusation, though he did find fault with the president.
I think his angry rhetoric was reckless, and I think it was harmful.
But not harmful enough, allies say, to warrant removal.
I don't support an effort to invoke the 25th Amendment now.
South Carolina's Lindsey Graham has spent more time with Mr. Trump than nearly any other lawmaker.
Do you believe, after spending so much time with him, that he is mentally unwell, as some of his aides have said?
No, I think he's very frustrated. He thinks the election was stolen. I think he's got some very bad advisors.
In Wilmington, Delaware, President-elect Joe Biden argued the advisors are not the main problem.
He unleashed an all-out assault on our institutions of our democracy from the outset. And yesterday was but the culmination of that unrelenting attack.
All right, so Nancy Cordes is joining us now from Capitol Hill. Nancy, let's start with this conference call that Speaker Pelosi is going to be holding with other House Democrats at noon. They are set to discuss an impeachment efforts. What's the latest on that?
Well, it looks, Anne-Marie, as if this effort is actually already well underway, even in advance of this call, because a short time ago, Assistant Speaker Katherine Clark, she's a Democrat from Massachusetts, in the House, said on CNN that they are prepared to take a vote on articles of impeachment by midweek next week. if the 25th Amendment is not invoked before then, basically if a majority of the president's cabinet doesn't agree that he is unfit for office and removes him and replaces him with Vice President Pence for the next 12 days of the last 12 days of his term. So the horse may have already left the barn in this case, even in advance of this phone call where Speaker Pelosi is basically going to be taking the temperature of her Democratic caucus and finding out how quickly they want to move on this, whether they all indeed do want to move on it and would vote in favor of articles of impeachment if they were brought to the House floor.
So, Nancy, as you know, Republicans are now facing this reckoning over President Trump and how to handle the situation. Senator Ben Sasse was on CBS this morning earlier today talking about impeachment. Let me play a bit of that.
The most important question is what happens to America after the next 12 days, and not just 12 weeks and 12 months from now, but 12 years from now. And so the House, if they come together and have a process, I will definitely consider whatever articles they might move, because as I've told you, I believe the president has disregarded his oath of office. He swore an oath to the American people to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. He acted against that. What he did was wicked. That said, the question of what the House does now and how the Senate responds to it over the next 12 days is a critically important question.
Nancy, just the fact that Senator Sasse is even entertaining the notion that the House may impeach the President of the United States, and he's open to hearing and listening to what the House may consider, is a very different take from a Republican than we've seen just over the last 4 years, and even as recently as the last impeachment. It's got to make me think. I thought what was sort of telling in Senator Sasse's comment there was what happens after. There are a lot of people, Republicans, not Democrats, that are worried that President Trump may try to run again in 2024, and maybe this would prevent that.
I think you really hit the nail on the head, Vlad, and my eyes opened wide when I heard Senator Sasse say that he was open to voting for articles of impeachment, that he felt that the president had betrayed the country. What a change from early 2020 when, as you'll recall, only one Republican senator, Mitt Romney of Utah, voted in favor of the last articles of impeachment. But we are in a very different situation right now where, as Senator Sasse said, they're thinking about the future. They're thinking about posterity. They're thinking about what message this sends to future generations about what Congress would abide by, what Congress would let slide. And it's possible that even some Republicans would like to be on the record saying that these were impeachable offenses. Now, here's what we know. We know that House Democrats have already written up articles of impeachment. This is kind of, speed impeachment, if you will. They've written up the articles. They accuse the president of willfully inciting violence. Remember that in the Constitution, a president can be impeached for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. So the articles argue that the president's actions on Wednesday fit that definition, and the House, because it is controlled by Democrats, ostensibly, if Speaker Pelosi brought everyone back here to Washington, because keep in mind that Congress is on recess. They're not even supposed to be here next week. They're not coming back as of now until January 20th, the day that President-elect Biden is supposed to be sworn in. So she would have to bring everyone back from recess. They would take a vote. We would skip the committee process entirely, so it wouldn't look anything like the impeachment process that dragged out for months and months the last time around. They would come back, they would have the articles, they would have the evidence, and they would just vote in the House. Then, by law, if the House votes, the Senate has to hold a trial. Now, whether they can hold a trial the next day or in the next couple of days is, we're in totally uncharted territory right now, so these are details that have yet to be worked out. But the question is whether the Senate could actually hold some kind of truncated, abbreviated trial into what, after all, is a less complicated situation than what the president was being impeached for the last time around. Obviously, there are fewer players. It's a more clear-cut series of events. Whether the Senate would actually take up some kind of trial before January 20th, the day that a new president comes into office. So a lot of unanswered questions right now, and those are the kinds of questions that we'll be asking of congressional leaders today.
We're learning that Nancy Pelosi has ordered the flags at the Capitol to be at half staff, which makes a lot of sense. In the aftermath of what happened on Wednesday, I imagine the mood is quite somber, and we know that we're learning now that at least one Capitol police officer has died as a result of his interactions with the mob there. It's also sort of the Republican Party looking at what is left of the party. What are the conversations that they are having now about where the party goes from here, what they're going to look like? We've heard some pretty dramatic stories about conversations happening behind the scenes. Kevin McCarthy calling up the president, demanding that he do something. It seems like things are sort of coming apart.
Yes, and there are a lot of accusations, Anne-Marie, a lot of bad feelings. But what we haven't seen so far is anyone who has been, on the receiving end of those accusations actually stand up and say, I made a mistake. I did the wrong thing. I shouldn't have pushed this. And that includes, by the way, Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader, who was among the more than 120 House Republicans who voted late Wednesday night, early Thursday morning to object to the Electoral College results, even after all of this happened. It includes Ted Cruz, senator from Texas, who has been called out by name and anonymously online by some of his Senate colleagues who say you pushed this too far. Senator Josh Hawley, I'd put him in that same boat, of Missouri. They've been accused of basically lying to their own supporters by giving them false hope that somehow there was a way to get these electoral results thrown out, and that somehow this election was rigged and that there was all this voter fraud, when we know that there really isn't any evidence of that. And so they're getting some pretty withering criticism from their colleagues and from the outside. Josh Hawley, he was taken to task by former Senator Jack Danforth of Missouri, who was one of his big champions when he ran for the Senate. Danforth now saying that it was the biggest mistake of his life to champion Josh Hawley, who also, by the way, just lost a book deal with Simon & Schuster over all of this. But Hawley and Cruz have stood by their guns and said that they don't think that they did anything wrong. They've criticized the president, but in terms of taking any personal responsibility, that hasn't really happened yet. So it's hard to see, whether this reckoning is really going to lead anywhere, when so far a lot of these GOP lawmakers have been more comfortable criticizing the president than they have been in the past, but not as comfortable really shining that magnifying glass on themselves quite yet.
So, Nancy, let me just point out that Simon & Schuster is a division of Viacom CBS. But to your point that you were making about Senator Hawley, there have been calls, as you say, for him to resign his office. There have also been calls for Ted Cruz to resign. Even the Wall Street Journal, which, let's not forget, is owned by Rupert Murdoch's News Corp, has called for the President of the United States to resign, the Wall Street editorial board. The first Secretary of Defense, General James Mattis, called folks like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz pseudo-political leaders whose names will live in infamy as profiles in cowardice. So are you hearing at all, Nancy, that you could see a resignation, not from the President of the United States, but from a Senator Hawley or Ted Cruz? Do you even think, Nancy, that if they don't resign, that they could sort of be ostracized by members of their own party, as we now know Chuck Schumer is going to be the majority leader?
I don't really think so, Vlad. First of all, because they don't think that they did anything wrong. So I think the idea that they would willingly resign is unlikely. And I think it's going to be very difficult for their Republican colleagues to really kind of take them to task, because after all, there are a lot of people in the base who have cheered what they have done, who were right there with them. And also, where do you draw the line? I mean, it wasn't just Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley. There were half a dozen other Senate Republicans who voted with them, who join them in this cause. More than half of House Republicans join them in this cause. Should they all resign? Should they all step down? That's just not going to happen. So there is this kind of standoff within the party right now between those who still feel that somehow something happened in this election, despite the lack of evidence, that was unfair, and or feel that they need to continue to stand by this president because so many in the base still support him. But I thought it was really interesting what Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal wrote. She said that individuals like Cruz and Hawley were appealing not to the base, but to a sickness within the base. Basically, that they were sending a message to those who were very vulnerable to misinformation that somehow the president had been unfairly cheated out of his victory. And when you have people out there who are very vulnerable to that kind of misinformation, and then on top of that, to exhortations from the president and his allies to storm the Capitol, trial by combat, according to Rudy Giuliani and all the rest, that creates a really dangerous and ongoing situation. I don't think we're out of it yet. And there is great concern among lawmakers here on Capitol Hill that the Capitol could come under attack again, especially as in the lead up to inauguration. So there's a lot of trepidation here right now.
Yeah. At this point, it strikes me, and Anne Marie and I have talked about this, that Senator Tom Cotton, who had an op-ed himself in the Wall Street Journal, and he, in the op-ed, said that the president of the United States is the one who heedlessly goaded the crowd on the mall. And he went on to criticize Republicans who encouraged false hopes that Congress could overturn this election. If he's thinking about a run in 2024, I got to believe that it's still early, but that he's in a better position with the position that he's taken today now than guys like Hawley and Cruz, but we'll have to see. Nancy, so great to have you. Thank you for everything this week. I know I said it yesterday, but thank all the team, Alan He and Catherine Watson and Grace Seegers, and all the producers that work with you. You guys were in there when that was happening, and a lot of our producers were there. A lot of our reporters were in the halls of Congress while these folks overran it, and we're just so grateful that you were able to continue to do your jobs through it all. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Vlad. I feel really lucky to be part of such an intrepid team. They were just truly amazing, rose to the occasion this week, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we do too. Thank you.